You stopped at a red light today. Maybe you didn't even think about it. You just stopped. Nobody chased you down. No one held a spear to your chest. A red circle of light told your foot to press the brake, and it did. That's law, working exactly as designed. Invisible, automatic, something you obey 100 times a day without ever once questioning where the rule came from, or why you follow it, or what would happen to a species that never figured out how to do this at all. Here's what you probably think you know. Somewhere back in the mists of prehistory, a king or a chief stood up, pointed at his people and said, "These are the rules now. Obey them or else." Law, in this version of the story, is something imposed from above, a tool of power, something rulers handed down to control everyone beneath them. That story isn't wrong exactly, but it arrives far too late. Because long before there were kings, before there were written codes, before there was anything resembling a courtroom, there were already rules, enforced rules, rules with consequences. And almost none of them came from a throne. Start with the obvious problem. For roughly 95% of human history, there were no kings, no governments, no police. Just small bands of hunter-gatherers, moving together, rarely more than a few dozen people at a time. And yet anthropologists studying these societies, both in the archaeological record and in the few hunter-gatherer communities still living this way today, find something remarkable. These groups were not lawless. They followed intricate systems of obligation, reciprocity, and punishment, all without a single written statute, and often without anyone holding formal authority at all. Share your kill with the group, or face exclusion. Honor a promise, or lose your standing. Steal from a kinsman, and the whole camp knows by nightfall. There was no judge. There didn't need to be one. The entire group functioned as judge, jury, and memory. Reputation was the court. Gossip was the enforcement mechanism. And banishment, the ultimate sentence, could be a death sentence in a world where survival depended entirely on the group. This is the part textbooks skip. Law didn't begin with writing. It began with something far older and far more human. The simple, brutal fact that living in a group requires rules, and any group that fails to enforce them eventually falls apart. So if rules existed for tens of thousands of years before anyone wrote them down, why did it take so long to put law on a tablet? Because writing itself is shockingly recent. Cuneiform script only emerges in Mesopotamia around 3400 BCE. Humans had been living in organized settlements, farming, trading, and yes, following rules, for thousands of years before anyone had a way to record a law permanently. And even once writing existed, most early law wasn't written to invent new rules. It was written to preserve rules everyone already followed by custom. The earliest legal texts we've found aren't creative acts of legislation. They're transcriptions. Someone finally wrote down what the community already knew. The oldest surviving law code in human history comes from the city of in Mesopotamia, issued under the ruler Ur-Nammu, around 2100 to 2050 BCE. It predates the far more famous Code of Hammurabi by roughly 3 centuries. The Code of Ur-Nammu opens not with threats, but with a boast. The king claims to have established justice in the land, protected the orphan and the widow from the powerful, and set fair weights and measures. Then it lists specific penalties, mostly in the form of fines rather than physical punishment. Injure a man's eye, pay silver. Break a bone, pay silver. This wasn't chaos being tamed for the first time. It was an existing sense of fairness finally being carved into clay so it couldn't be forgotten, argued away, or bent by whoever happened to be in charge that year. Then, around 1754 BCE, something shifts. Hammurabi, king of Babylon, has his laws inscribed on an enormous stone pillar, over 2 meters tall, and placed in a public temple where anyone could see it. Nearly 300 laws, covering everything from theft and trade disputes to marriage, inheritance, and medical malpractice. This is where law stops being purely a community memory and starts becoming something else entirely, a tool of the state. The famous phrase carved partway through the stele, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, wasn't really about revenge. It was about limits. In a world without formal courts, personal vengeance could spiral endlessly, one family avenging a wrong, then the other family avenging the punishment, forever. Hammurabi's code set a ceiling, the punishment could not exceed the crime. That single idea, proportionality, is one of the oldest building blocks of every legal system that exists today. But notice something else about that stone pillar. It's public, visible, permanent. A king who writes his laws in stone isn't just organizing his kingdom. He's making an argument about himself. Look how just I am. Look how fair. The law becomes proof of legitimate rule, not just a means of enforcing it. From here, the idea spreads and mutates across every civilization that follows. In Egypt, law blends with religious order, the concept of ma'at, cosmic balance and truth that the pharaoh was bound to uphold. In ancient Athens, around 621 BCE, a lawgiver named Draco writes down Athens' laws for the first time, and the punishments are so severe for even minor offenses that the word draconian still describes harsh law today. A few decades later, Solon rewrites much of it, softening the penalties and laying groundwork for what would eventually become participatory justice. Rome takes it further still. Around 451 to 450 BCE, the 12 tables are inscribed and displayed in the Roman Forum, not because Roman citizens couldn't remember the rules, but because the plebeians, the common people, were tired of aristocratic judges quietly interpreting unwritten law however it benefited them. Writing the law down wasn't just about clarity. It was about taking power away from whoever controlled the secret of what the rules actually were. That single insight echoes across the next 2,000 years of legal history. Law written down is law that can be checked. Law that can be checked is law that can be challenged. And law that can be challenged is the first seed of everything that eventually becomes constitutional government, due process, and the idea that even a king answers to something written. Step back, and the shape of the whole story comes into focus. Law didn't begin as an instrument of kings. It began as an instinct, baked into small groups of hunter-gatherers, who had no ruler at all, just people who understood, intuitively, that a group without rules doesn't survive very long. Long before anyone carved a single law into stone, humans were already enforcing fairness through memory, reputation, and the threat of exclusion. Writing didn't invent law. It preserved it, then weaponized it, then, eventually, tamed the very rulers who had weaponized it in the first place. Every courtroom you've ever seen, every contract you've ever signed, every red light you've ever stopped at without thinking, traces back through an unbroken chain to a clay tablet in Ur, boasting that even a king had protected the widow and the orphan from the powerful. You didn't invent your instinct for fairness. You inherited it, from people who had no writing, no courts, and no kings at all, and who somehow figured out anyway that a promise broken today is a group that doesn't survive tomorrow.